More often than not, NFL games are pretty close. It's one of the things that separate the pros from college.
Diggs! Sideline! Touchdown! Unbelievable!
A bad team in D1 is not the same thing as a bad team in the NFL. That being said, the NFL is not without its blowouts, and said blowouts might not even happen between a good team and a bad team. Sometimes it's even in a championship. For example, when you had the Legion of Boom just devour the #1 offense in the NFL back in 2015 in the Denver Broncos, led by Peyton Manning. Now don't get me wrong, when an insane, and I'm talking about an absurd blowout occurs, we, or at the very least I, can't stop watching. Sometimes the term blowout can be subjective, so I leave it up to you for the exact definition when it comes to the NFL. But what is the biggest blowout ever? Well, let's begin our search with one that was the most recent. The location, Hard Rock Stadium, where the Dolphins unleashed an offensive performance so devastating that the Broncos were left reeling. But no one could have imagined the slobber knocker that was going to take place. From the first snap, it was apparent the Dolphins were on another level. The quarterback, Tua Tagovailoa, was hot and threw for over 300 yards, tossing 4 touchdowns in the process, with Tyreek Hill on the receiving end of 157 of those yards. But this is the game where you realize the Dolphins were more than just Tua and Tyreek Hill. On the ground, Devon Achane would explode for 203 rushing yards and an insane 4 touchdowns. Raheem Mostert wasn't about to be outdone though, adding another 142 and another 4 touchdowns to complete a perfect storm of offensive perfection. The Dolphins weren't just winning, they were obliterating every facet of the game.
Exodia! Obliterate!
Touchdowns came on 10 of their 13 drives, and not once did they ever punt. This is what Caleb Williams thought he was going to do when he sent those messages to his punter. By the end of the fourth quarter, the Broncos defense had been shredded into oblivion. The final score, 70-20. And if it's somewhat still fresh in your memories, guys, they could have actually gotten the record, but they chose not to. They got those 70 points relatively early in the fourth. So it's insane to think that this could have been much more catastrophic had Mike McDaniel not put on the brakes. While this is the most recent famous definition of the term, it's not the biggest blowout in the modern era. And by modern era, I mean since the 1970 merger. So I guess it's not that modern. That distinction goes to the massacre that transpired between the Patriots and the Titans in 2009. In this game, the cold, snow-drenched field of Gillette Stadium in Foxborough, Massachusetts became the setting for one of the most shocking and overwhelming performances in NFL history. On one side, you had the New England Patriots sitting at a solid 3-2 record with Tom Brady at the helm, and on the other, you had a struggling, to say the least, Tennessee Titans, desperately searching for their first win of the season at 0-5. Yet, no one could have predicted the football massacre that was about to unfold. From the very first whistle, it was clear that the Titans were outmatched. How outmatched? By halftime, the Patriots had an absurd 45-0 lead. Brady was in total control, to say the least, throwing for a record-breaking 5 touchdown passes in just the second quarter. Randy Moss and Wes Welker shredded the Titans' defense, combining for over 250 yards and multiple touchdowns. Meanwhile, the Titans were completely out of sync. Turnovers, fumbles, interceptions, they couldn't get out of their own way. Their quarterback duo of Kerry Collins and Vince Young combined for a miserable -7 yards in passing. Yes, you read that right. -7 total passing yards. By the time the final whistle blew, the score was an outlandish 59-0, marking it the largest shutout in modern NFL history. Be honest, guys, you can't even put up 45-0 every time in Madden, yet these guys were doing it in real life. And while this is probably the game most fans will look to as the biggest blowout ever, it's only second to the 73-point difference in the NFL championship game between the Bears and the Redskins all the way back in 1940. The date was December 8, 1940, and it's a day that is still talked about even now. The scene that day in Griffith Stadium in Washington, D.C. for the championship game was something that we had never seen nor seen since. There was a catch 3 weeks back, as the Redskins had beaten the Bears 7-3, and to add insult to injury, Washington was ridiculing the Bears' innovative T-formation offense, so they were throwing jabs before the game even started. Shots were fired, and with this, the Bears would decide to show no mercy.
This is Sparta!
From the very first kickoff, one could tell that the Bears were on a mission. Sid Luckman, who became known as one of the league's great quarterbacks of this era, led a perfect offensive afternoon against Washington, carving up their defense with pinpoint passes and timely runs. The Bears didn't just score, they humiliated Washington at every turn. Touchdowns came about in nearly every conceivable way, by rush, pass, blocked punts, or returning them for scores. And on defense, every time the Redskins blinked, the Bears were in the end zone again. It turned into an utter onslaught. The score was already 28-0 as the first half wound to a close. Now let me put that in perspective, you guys. 28-0 is awful, yes. But the Patriots were up 45-0 at halftime and only scored 2 more touchdowns when they could have scored so much more. But the Bears, like I mentioned, were on a mission this day. They were going to humiliate Washington for talking shit. And boy, did they just keep pouring it on in the second half. After a 28-0 start, the Bears would score another astonishing 45 points in the second half, while unrelenting on defense, holding Washington to 0 total points. The final score at the end of the day, in an NFL championship game no less, was 73-0, making it the biggest or the greatest lopsided game in NFL history, and it's a record that still holds to this day, now 84 years later. With all these one-sided disasters, maybe we should talk about something more competitive though. Well, maybe. Let's talk about the highest scoring game in NFL history. Alright, the highest scoring game. That must mean that both teams put up an insane amount of points. Well, yeah, technically. Yet, the highest scoring game in NFL history is also still considered a blowout. This happened on November 27th, 1966, between the Redskins and the Giants. Pre-merger, the NFL was not known for that many moments of high-scoring games, but to this day, it's a record that hasn't been broken. So take that as you will. Washington from the get-go turned on the Jets and would not relent, piling up a 34-14 lead by halftime. And New York did do their best to keep up, as they would score at least 13 points in all but the first quarter in hopes that they would catch up at some point. However, the Giants' defense simply sold in this one. The game was an all-out scoring frenzy, as there were 16 total touchdowns, with the Redskins scoring 11 of them themselves. This, for the packed house in Yankee Stadium, was quite a show if you enjoyed a barrage of touchdowns and zero defense. The Giants did everything in their power to mount a comeback, but Washington was just too strong, too fast, and too precise, and refused to let up. When the final whistle blew, the scoreboard read 72-41. This final score totaled 113 points, the most in NFL history, like I was mentioning, to this day. Yet this also could be considered a blowout. The Giants did score 41 points, yet somehow, someway, still lost by 31. A differential that is the equivalent of 4 touchdowns and a field goal. Guys, 4 touchdowns and a field goal in a game? is more than a solid showing even in today's NFL. Yet despite scoring 41, they lost by 31. Like, that's crazy. Each one of these games remind us that any given Sunday, your team could pull off an upset, or they could very much be on the receiving end of one of the greatest lopsided games that we have ever seen. Like, how do you recover as a fan if your team loses 73-0, 59-0, 70-20? You guys could take a note from the Broncos, as of my recording, are in the playoff hunt just a year removed from this game. So, you know, take some good with that bad, I guess. Which blowout had you at the edge of your seat? Let me know in the comments down below, and let me know what NFL blowout do you specifically remember, or if you have a favorite one, if you have a favorite blowout. That's gonna do it for me. This is Triple DS. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and to everybody still watching, go ahead and smash that subscribe and like button if you haven't done so already. We are on the road to 3,000 subs, potentially 4,000 by the time this video goes up. Thank you guys so much for your support. But until next time, Shaboya!